Welcome back, team, to another React update. We are making good progress this week. Good progress on our React developer Udacity NANODEGREE. I'm trying to finish each segment. Right now I'm on lesson 2.3. State management is what we're going over before making a video. However, this one is so long, I'm not quite done with it yet. So we're going to go through what I have since it's Friday, which is our official upload day as of Tuesday this week. All videos will be posted on Friday. This is the plan. We'll see how consistently we can stick with the plan. I have not reviewed these notes since actually going through the lessons, and since I've been working on this all week and trying to go through as quickly as possible in an attempt to finish this one, we will review them together. Now, bear with me if I need to, refresh my brain a little bit as we go through this stuff. But let's begin. I'm including all the links in the description below, so if you want to follow along or start practicing React yourself, please visit the links. And I officially have a Team Talima GitHub repo for all of the Udacity projects. If you visit the repository, you'll see that each branch is a different Udacity exercise that I have completed and then uploaded to GitHub. I don't have the original version, but I have my completed work on there. So if you want to see the exercises I'm practicing to practice the React fundamentals, specifically state management, you can check out our repository. That'll be the top link in the video description below. So let's jump into this. For lesson 2.3.1, and I'm missing my point, which makes me sad, so there's the point there, React concepts. So we review the React concepts. Props allow you to pass data into components. This is true. Whenever you can create a component, the way you share information, share data with that component is you pass it props. You can have as many props as you want. You just pick your key, pick your name, pass in object array, whatever you're passing in. Function component. So this is a type of component, function components. It's an alternate, intuitive approach to create components. A function component is a component that doesn't have to manage state. So if you just have props, or if it's a component that's just going to display information, it doesn't have to manage any data or information. I hope I'm getting all of this right, but that is a function component. Whenever you have the chance to create a stateless functional component, do so because it's more performant than creating a class component that extends React's component class. So if you can create a functional component, go ahead and do that. Controlled components, I just covered this one. So controlled components allow you to hook forms to component state. This is true. So controlled components, my understanding is that controlled components is a term that is only referred to in regards to React components that work within forms, work within website forms. What a controlled component does is normally it changes how forms state is managed. Normally on a regular website that is not using React, the form state is managed by the DOM. But because we're using React, because one of the reasons is it's so great at state management. So obviously if we're doing a form, we want React to manage our form's state, since that's one of the things it's best at. That's one of the things we use it for. So what we want to do is, and what you can do using controlled components, is whenever user input, for example, this is the exercise I just covered, whenever you receive user input, that input is hooked, or that component which is receiving the input is hooked up to a handler function, some kind of method, which then that method updates the component state with whatever the user input was, and then that state, once updated, whenever you update a component state, React automatically re-renders the component of the state that's just changed. It'll automatically re-render that component. So now that you have the new state and it's being re-rendered, that new value of the state gets passed into the form, and then the form renders the change. So in that way, user inputs into the form calls a function, the function updates the state, which automatically causes React to re-render the component, to re-render the form, which then is displaying your new state, whatever value that is, which would be whatever the user input was. So hopefully that makes sense. It's very, very cool. It took me just a little bit to wrap my brain around the circle, the information flow there, the data flow there, but it does make perfect sense. It's actually quite simple once you just grasp it, so it was really cool. Controlled components seem to just refer to components that control form state. So that's what basically we're going to be covering in this whole lesson. I think I only have like one lesson, maybe 2 lessons left to go over as far as learning new material and knowledge, and then there's 4 exercises still left to complete. So I'm going to be working on that later today and tomorrow, because by the time I finish recording this and get this video up, I'm going to have to go to work. Happy times! Happy times! Not really, it's Friday night. It's going to be great. Moving on, we started a contacts app project. This one is actually the only one not on GitHub, because this is like the practice project that we're building in the lesson, like to learn all this stuff. So that's just for me to use, and then if you guys want to see my personal work on the exercises, you can check that out. But the contacts app is just something I'm building to like test all of these new concepts that I'm learning. The front end, so we're using port 3000, backend server port 501. That is what it is. Lesson 2.3.2. Add custom attributes to components. So you can add custom attributes to your components. Access attribute value of the component using this.props value. Exactly. So this is how you pass in props. Each one of these custom attributes would be the name of the prop, and then whatever it equals would be the value of the prop. So then once you go into like the component's separate file, you can use those it's like arguments. I think we're actually about to get this. So beautiful. That's the next comment. I promise I didn't read ahead. Maybe my subconscious or peripheral vision saw it, but here we are. So pass arguments to a function, and you pass props to a component. So if you have a constant contacts, this array, you can pass in contacts as a custom attribute, as a prop, and then you access it within the component, within the list contacts class as this dot props dot, in this case it would be contacts. So the value of this prop, the name of this prop is contacts. So that's beautiful. This is the value, this is the name. You would access it via the name. Obviously you would return the value. I know you understand programming. You're watching this video, you understand how this works. Excuse my poor choice of words. Moving on, each child of an array or iterator needs to have a unique key prop. This is something I forgot in my first couple of projects, but you absolutely need this because React uses the key as like an identifier for that DOM node. And then if the key, I hope I'm using this correctly. I hope I'm saying this correctly. It's some kind of identifier, and then the key will help React know if that particular node needs to be re-rendered. React is so performant because it renders things as little as possible. It only re-renders things when it's necessary, but to be able to tell if it's necessary, it has to have that key there. It uses the key to figure that out. So whenever you're doing like a list, each list item needs a key. If you're doing an array, iterator, you have to have a key. You can pass multiple props to a component. Of course you can. So if you are doing, so this is just a div. This isn't like a made React component, like a custom React component, but you can pass it to a div tag just like any other attribute. You have time, you have location. We use the curly braces to get us back into JavaScript. This is the syntax for JSX, so if this looks a little bit funky, you can just look up JSX. It's freaking awesome. I love it. A prop is any input that you pass to a React component. This is true. All props are stored on the this.props object. Yes, so every component will have this.props, and then you can access all of your custom props, all the data you pass through this.props.whatever. You can read more about it here. Will be in the link in the description. We have 2.3.3. All this did here was introduce us to the in-classroom workspace. It was pretty cool. It talked about how to upload your projects to GitHub and get things like that done. Pretty easy to set up. It took a little bit of time, but now that I have a system, it's really, really awesome. And I'm glad. I wasn't sure if I wanted to host like every project in the one repository, but I absolutely did not want the whole of Team Talima's GitHub to be taken up with just one NANODEGREE, one course's like bajillion exercises. So as I said before, each of my exercises was posted as a separate branch, even though each is a different program, each is a different exercise. I posted them in one repository, each on a different branch. I think it's a lot more organized that way. So I don't plan to go back to them really, or if I do, not often at all. So hopefully that'll work out for you guys as well. We have 2.3.4, first exercise of passing data. Use React in the data below, which they provided, to display a list of users alongside their favorite movies. So that would be passing data 1, that's our first branch. Passing data 2, display a list of movies where each movie contains a list of users that favorited it. If the movie has been favorited, then display a list of all the users who said that this movie was their favorite. If the movie has not been favorited, display some text stating that no one favorited the movie. This one actually took me probably the most time to work out because I was still new to programming with React, and it had like, they wanted you to break it down, make sure it was modular. So like in this one, I just did it like all in one file just to be quick about it, and because that was easiest. And this one, they wanted me to really break it down and make sure that you were doing like proper React coding. So it was really cool, but it definitely took the longest of any exercise I've done so far. GitHub link here, passing data 2. Next lesson, 2.3.6, creating React components. Class component. Okay, so this is where we already talked about this a little bit at the beginning. Class component, class with a render method. Stateless, so all React components must have a render method. That's the only method that is required in every single one. Stateless functional component is a regular function. This is a regular JavaScript function. And what you're going to be returning from that function is it's going to be the same as a class component. It's going to be like a, hopefully I'm saying this right, encapsulating like node. So you might have a div tag. You can still use JSX. So you might have a div tag, and then everything else you want to return is within that div tag, but just one parent node. You can just return that from your regular JavaScript function, and it'll work like any other React components. It's pretty cool. Pretty cool, pretty simple. Can use stateless functional components when your component does not keep track of internal state, i.e. it only has a render method, only displays data, does not manage it. We went over that as well. So stateless functional components, or if you're just displaying data like in a certain format, in a certain location, or certain type of data for a certain thing, like it's a UI component just like anything else, but it only displays the data. It's a display component, doesn't manage it in any way. Otherwise it won't work out. You can't do it. You need the React class component. Props are accessed in stateless functional components without the this keyword. So when you're using a regular JavaScript function, it's just props dot whatever. It's only when you're in a React class component you need this dot props whatever. React components are JavaScript functions that return HTML for rendering. That's hopefully what I just talked about a little bit with the div example. React components, they're just JavaScript functions that return HTML for rendering. And that's what stateless functional components do as well. We have more here, functional components versus stateless functional components versus stateless components. This was an article I actually read, and it was very cool in describing the three differences. I don't remember them off the top of my head, but it was clear in this article why you want to use these terms. Each term means something different, so ideally you'll use them carefully. Hopefully I got my notes right. I don't think I went back and corrected my notes after reading the article. So again, if you want to know the difference between stateless functional components and functional components, I suggest you take the time to read this. It's not very long, which is cool. The next exercise, using functional components. This was very easy. Modify the app to use stateless functional components. Better for performance reasons, which is true. So we just went back and modified our movie app. Instead of using React class components, we just turn them into regular JavaScript functions, basically. And that was very easy and cool. 2.3.8. Props refer to attributes from parent... What is this about? I'm trying to get ahead of this. Well, whatever. I'll just read my notes. Props refer... I don't remember what each individual lesson of the module went over, and it drives me crazy. But like I said, I didn't review these before the video, so for better or worse, we're just gonna review together. Props refer to attributes from parent components. This is true. So props refer to attributes from parent components. Props represent read-only data that are immutable. This is also true. You read from props. You use the data from props. You don't change them. State. Okay, so we must have gotten into state in this one. This must have been the first lesson that covered state. State represents mutable data that affects what is rendered on the page. State changes. It is supposed to change. It is supposed to change in many circumstances frequently. So it is a fine and good thing to have your state change. State is managed internally by the component. Each component has its own state, or can have its own state. State commonly changes due to user input, also true. State can be defined at initialization, this is true. So in the constructor of your component, each React component can be a class. If it's going to be managing state, then it will be a class. So you can, in the constructor of that class, have you can initialize your state. You can have an initialization of state. Avoid initializing the initial state with props. If props update, state will not change unless the component refreshes. So my understanding of this, because props come from the parent component, if the parent component is being refreshed, or is being re-rendered, or updating, or changing the props of what they're passing you, that will not reflect in the state of the component you're working in unless the component you're working in itself refreshes, because then it would run the constructor again, then it would set the initial state using those new props. But if not, if it doesn't matter if the props update, because you're setting your state in the constructor file. That's only going to run when you create your component, construct your component for the first time. So don't use props, because even if those props update, don't use props in your state, because even if the props update, it won't update your state. You got to find a different way of doing things. It also results in duplication of data and deviates from the dependable source of truth. State is supposed to be the source of truth of what your component should be. Your component relies on its internally managed state. So don't have it rely on state and props. Like don't duplicate the data in that way. I'm sure there's better ways of saying that, but that's how my mind first views it. So just don't use props to initialize your state, guys. Don't do it. It doesn't sound like a fun thing. Moving on, we have key benefit of React. So a key benefit of React is to re-render page, just update component state. This is true because every time you update a component state, React is built to automatically re-render that component. It knows, because this is how you're supposed to use React. React knows that if the state has changed, that means that UI component has changed. So they are going to automatically re-render that component. Every time you change the state of a component, React's going to automatically re-render that component for you. So it's brilliant. All you got to do to refresh your component is change your component state. Very simple concept. Very simple concept. Use it. Use it to your benefit. React compares previous and new output and determines what has changed. This process is called reconciliation. Yes. So it will compare the new, you just updated your state in a component. React will look at the current old component and it will look at the new component. It will compare exactly what changed in your component, and it will only change, like only create new DOM nodes or update the DOM nodes of the one thing that has changed, the few things that have changed, whatever it is. So it's going to reconcile the new output with the previous output, the previous with the new output. Very cool. Step 4, identify where your state should live. This was a cool article. I didn't read it through all the way, but I started on it. It's in the React docs, so definitely visit this one. I did spend some time here, but it was a long page, or maybe it clicked to a different page. I didn't read the whole thing it was going over. Why do I have this random thing open? Close that. Okay, there we go. Hang on. Coming back to my video. 2.3.9. Moving on. In React, your UI is a function of your state. So this phrase came up a few different places. And again, it's 100% true. Hopefully it's kind of sinking in as we go through these notes. In React, your UI is a function of your state. Your UI reflects the state. If you manage the state of your React application, you are, as a result, managing the UI of your application. So just manage the state properly, make sure it's good, make sure it's solid, no mess, no duplication of data. Update state with the set state method. Do not update state directly. Do not ever update state directly. Use the set state method. Pass set state a function. So you can pass it two different things. Set state can be passed a function. The first argument will be the previous state. So the state of a component is a JavaScript object. So if you are going to pass set state a function, then the first argument of that function will be the JavaScript object of the previous state, and the object returned from set state will merge with the previous state object to form a new state object. Easy peasy. You can also pass set state an object, and then that object will merge with the current state object to form a new state object. So no matter if you're going to pass it a function, which then returns an object, that will merge with the previous state, or you can just pass it an object directly, which will merge with the previous state. Both result in a new state object. So it's beautiful and good. Use functional set state when the new state depends on the previous state. So if you're updating a counter, then you're like a game score. You're going to need to know what the previous score was and then plus it by 1 point, or plus it by 10 points, or however your system works. Minus it 10 points. That'd be mean. Taking away player's score, that's just rude. How dare you? But if you're going to do that, if it relies on the previous state, then you have to use the functional set state. In the Udacity course, the guy like narrating the videos, his name is Tyler. I think it's Tyler McGinnis. He's pretty cool to listen to. He says that when he's coding in React, he just always uses functional set state. And that's just personal preference. So I guess there isn't like a performance gain or loss on that and how to set it up. Even if he's just going to, even if the change he's making doesn't rely on the previous state of his component, he will just structure all of his set states as by passing them a function, because so he doesn't have to think about it. So he doesn't have to worry about it. That's just how he does it. His code looks more consistent that way, I guess. I mean, that would be cool to me. I like clean looking code. I like it to look consistent. But anyway, so that was very cool to learn. I'm sharing that tip with you guys if you want to consider doing that. You definitely can't just rely on passing an object all the time, because you will rely on the previous state some of the times. But you can either use both, or you can just use functional set state. It's up to you. State object properties can be updated independently. Yes. So I believe what they mean by this is you can call set state, and you don't have to pass in a new value for all 7 of the properties of your state object. You can just pass in the one new value for the one property that you're trying to update. And those 2 objects, the previous 7 property state object and your new 1 property state object, will still merge perfectly fine. You don't have to worry about that. You can update properties independently. This moves on to exercise 2.3.10, managing state. Create a game. We actually created a game. It was so cool. I loved it. It was so much fun. This one actually may have taken me more time than the second one, which I said took me the most time. This one may have been it, but it was pretty close. This was very, very cool. I had to like kind of pre-plan it a little bit in my brain a little bit better. I don't think I used paper, but I made some like pseudocode in my text editor as I was working through it, and it was very nice. It came out quite well. No bugs, unless I like had a typo or something, but those don't count. No like thought process it went well, okay? And if you want to check out the game, you can check out our GitHub. Managing state is right there. We have 2.3.11. Type check your components props with prop types. This is very cool, and I can totally see how this would be even more useful as our apps continue to grow. I was not thinking ahead as, oh, this might be a problem later on, but once they pointed it out, it's like, yeah, this would be a problem later on. You want to make sure that as you're passing your components different props, that you're prepared and expecting an object, so that you can, okay, let's say you're prepared and expecting an array. Well, arrays have the map function and the filter function, and objects do not. So if instead your parent component passes you an object, that's going to break everything, at least within that one component, which may break everything overall. Who knows? Depends on that one component's importance. But we're going to need an array to use map and/or filter. So you can use prop types as a quick way as you're developing to see if any section of your app under different circumstances is passing you something false or something it shouldn't be passing you. So prop types enables us to define our desired data type. Prop types will error warn us if our prop does not match defined data type, the defined data type. I had to shorten some of my sentences because otherwise they wrap, and I don't like it when they wrap. So if something does not look right on your screen, I know, sorry. So npm install save prop types, you can do that if you want. And then as an example, we did this right at the bottom of each of the component files, right before the export default, your component name. So right before the export default, we just plopped this in. And it was game.proptypes equals, and then you're going to create an object I just use title as the example here, and then it'll be prop types dot whatever data type you want. And then if you want to, you can add is required, if that is a prop that is required to be passed to this component every time. So if it's a required prop, you can add that. If not, then don't worry about it. What else do we got here? We are going to do great way to validate intended data types in React apps. Yes, it is. It's wonderful. Feel free to read more about it if you want. I will add this, because I don't think I included it later in the notes, that I believe this is how you did it for a functional component. If you were creating a class component, then you can just add this right into your as like a property of your class. You can just add this into your class. I think that was the difference. There was one time when we first were learning about this, we put it at the bottom of our file, like outside of our main export. But it must have been the class component where we moved it like inside the class. Anyway, we have lesson 2.3.12. Begins with the React developer tools for Chrome. I've been hearing all about these. They seem amazing, but we had never used them before. So I'm like, you know what? I don't need them. I'm just going to keep doing my class. Well, apparently we need them now. Install the React dev tools if you are going to be programming and you use Chrome. They're freaking awesome. It's very cool, simple, easy to install. Over like 1 million people have installed the extension. I'm sure it's a safe and lovely extension. Typically, form state lives inside the DOM. So this is where we get to the controlled components. This is true. I said this at the beginning. Form state, the state of whatever form on a website, typically lives inside the DOM, the document object model. But since React, which is what we're learning, is so great at managing state, we really want to use React to manage all of our states. How do we do that? We use controlled components. Controlled components render a form. Form state lives inside the component's state. React controls the state of the form through controlled components. You use controlled components to render a form. If you're using a controlled component, or if you're creating a controlled component, then the form state lives within that component, within that component's state. The form state depends on the component state, takes information from the component state. So in that way, React controls the state of the form it is rendering. Controlled components value attribute. So yes, controlled components have a value attribute that you can attach to, like, let's say you're doing an input field. So you have your HTML tag, you have input, and then on that input tag, you're going to put value as one of your like custom attributes. Equals property of state. So value will always equal, or at least in this example, it will equal this.props. Whatever, I forget what we freaking used. This.props.name. When property updates, when that state property updates, the form value will change. So let's do query. That's what we did in our example. So let's say we have a state property, a component state property called query, and query equals an empty string. As soon as our user starts to type in the input field, we'll go through some mumbo jumbo method stuff, and it will update the component's state property query. So now query equals Talima. What's going to happen is the form, and this will happen instantaneously. So like after each letter, I'm sure there are ways to prevent it happening instantaneously, but why wouldn't you want it to happen instantaneously? I don't know. I guess if you didn't want to like constantly re-render your page. But anyway, so now you have Talima. What's going to happen is the form is going to take this, the form's input field has value, and value equals this.props.query. Well, query is no longer an empty string. Query is now Talima. So then in that form input field on your UI, on your screen, you're going to see the word Talima. Not because the user typed it in, but because React is displaying it through the component state. The component state holds the query Talima, and the input field is just taking that information from the component state. So in that way, the form's state, what the form is displaying through its input field, the form's state is managed by the component state. Hopefully I said that and it made sense. I think it did in the end. It just takes me a little while to get there sometimes. So thanks for hanging in there with me. Controlled components on change value attribute. So we have the value attribute, and now we also have the on change attribute. that you can put on. So again, we have our input element. It has its value attribute. It also has an onChange attribute. And this is where you hook up your method, your like handler method. So equals handler method. When form field changes, like when you receive user input, you're going to call this method. So that can be whatever, method new query. So whenever I type in, as soon as I type in a T to my user input, new query is going to be called. New query can do whatever you want it to do, but what we want it to do is set state. We'll call the method set state, and we'll pass it in the user input. So we'll pass it in T, and then T becomes the new state of our component's query property. So now query equals T. Well, the input field is still looking at our state to figure out what it should display on our UI, so now it's going to display T to our user. So the onChange is where you hook up the handler method. Controlled components. So controlled components are great because they support instant input validation. They allow conditionally disabling and enabling form buttons. They enforce input formats. I haven't actively used each of these three things, but if you learn about the process more, think about the process, they're great for these reasons. This is what they can do. These are some of the benefits, the main benefits of using controlled components. How user input affects the component. Okay, so I kind of went over this already, but here it is written out for people who did not understand my rambling explanation. So the user will enter text into an input field. The onChange event listener invokes its handler method, whatever method you've set it to equal. The handler method then calls set state, and thus updating the component's internal state. And because state has changed, the component is going to automatically re-render, and when it does that, the input field is still going to be looking, its value is set to something within the component state. Now that it's re-rendering, it's going to look at that state again and display the change. Find the change and display the change. Controlled components allow you to update UI based on the form state itself. Control components allow you to update UI based on the form state itself. Yes, I must have copied this from the course. Form state relies on the component state, but yes, this is what they allow you to do. It allows you to update your UI based on the form state, which relies on your component state. So each update to state has associated handler function, i.e. I have to drink water. I've just been talking too much. I had the water, I'm good. Each update to state has an associated handler function, i.e. the onChange attribute. Through the onChange attribute, you'll set that to equal whatever your handler function is for that specific element. Form elements receive their current value via the value attribute, that's right. Form input values are generally stored in the component state. Form input values, there you go. I mean, that makes sense. That's the one example I've used using controlled components so far, because I haven't gotten to the controlled components exercise. That's the next lesson right down here. But we're still up here, so don't jump ahead. Event handlers for a controlled element update the component state. Event handlers for a controlled element update the component state. This is true. So within the handler function, within the event handler, you will call this .set state. So this .set state will update something to do with the component state. That's just how the loop works. That's what you're going to do. Controlled components possess the source of truth for their forms inside the component state, not the DOM. Yes, so if you're using a React component, a controlled component renders a form. So it is a type of React component, and it's special because the component itself possesses the truth, the base information that the form needs. It doesn't live inside the DOM, it lives inside the component. The component possesses the source of truth. That phrase came up a lot, and I like it. It's a great phrase. If it has any deeper meaning than I just described, I don't know it. But the source of truth for the form lives inside a controlled component as opposed to living inside the DOM. If you're not, which is most typical. React does it differently though, because we have controlled components. And if you want to read more about them, read more about them. They're freaking awesome so far. Okay, next lesson is going to be an exercise using these controlled components. And then there is another exercise using controlled components. And then there is a lesson summary. And then there are 2 more exercises using everything we have learned thus far. So that'll be interesting. I don't even think I'm going to get through 2 exercises before having to go to work today, which just stinks. So I don't know if I can get through all 4 tomorrow because it is Friday night and I will probably be kept late at work, which is fine. I volunteer to stay late because money. But hopefully we'll have this done by the end of the weekend. I am taking Sunday off. It is the first day off. I'm just taking off for myself in a very long time. I'm going to get in my car. I'm going to spend gas by going to the beach. And I'm going to sit probably in a Starbucks near the beach, hopefully with a beach view. There was a Starbucks with a beach view down where I went to college in San Diego. Freaking awesome. I love that Starbucks. Too bad it's like an hour, 2 hours away, at least an hour and a half away. But hopefully I can find one at the beach I'm going to on Sunday, because that would be great. So I don't know if we'll even be through this by the end of the weekend. But that'll be a personal goal, to get through it by the end of the weekend. Maybe I can do 1 exercise today, 3 tomorrow, otherwise I'll do 2 tomorrow and 1 on Sunday. We should be able to do that. We should be able to finish this module by the end of the weekend. So, moving on from that will be awesome. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in to another Team Talima video. I just heard my little air freshener go off. It's on an automatic timer. It scared me a little bit. But anyway, thank you guys so much for tuning in to this new Team Talima video. Please consider liking the video, subscribing to our new channel, and turning on the little notification bell. I am still a little bit new to YouTube, but I hear that the notification bell is very important, so I will point that out. And thank you all very much for watching. I cannot even begin to describe how much I'm enjoying my React course. It is thanks to you guys I was able to afford to take this course, so thank you very much for sponsoring this educational opportunity for me. And I hope you enjoy these little sharing sessions. I definitely want to take you along for the journey, since it's thanks to you I'm able to do this. And I will see you next week, next Friday. I'm going to try and have a consistent upload time at like sometime between 2 or 3 in the afternoon. We'll get these videos up and out to you. So I will see you then, and I will see you next Tuesday for our Tuesday stream. Tuesday stream, Friday video. Peace out, team. Have a good one. Have a great weekend.